Hi, welcome to Healing Horizons, where each week we share the latest news and research in trauma informed care, positive and adverse childhood experiences, and psychological safety. I'm Allison Sabula.
And I'm Bree Twombly. I use she, her pronouns. And we both work at the 10 Collective, where we are trying to create a world where we genuinely care for one another. We invite you to consider hiring us here at 10 to support you in implementing trauma-informed care and psychological safety-based programs and policies that can help you to better care for your employees and, in turn, for the communities and families that you serve. You can learn more about us on our LinkedIn page or by going to 10-collective.com.
Yeah, awesome. Also, we have a new LinkedIn Live series starting on Tuesday that you're welcome to join. If you're already following us on LinkedIn, it may already pop up anyway. Same time as this one, Tuesdays for 30 minutes, and I will be going through each of the 8 realms of employee wellness from our new employee wellness self-assessment tool that we launched 2 weeks ago. And so we will go through each of the 8 realms for a half an hour on Tuesdays. So we will give out tips, best practices for trauma-informed employee wellness. So hope you will join for those. And of course, the recordings will be available as well. So today is Thursday, July 11th, 2024, content advisory. We will be talking about trauma, which sometimes includes violence. Okay, so in trauma-informed care, breaking the chain, Dr. Olajide Williams on inherited trauma and hip hop as a tool for social change. So, breaking the chain, physician and an educator, Dr. Olajide Williams co founded Hip Hop Public Health with hip hop icon Doug E. Fresh after recognizing the transformative power of hip hop music for improving health outcomes in communities of color. Hip Hop Public Health harnesses the power of hip hop music and culture by creating educational resources that teach children about well being and behavioral health in the US and globally. In many ways, hip hop music encapsulates the intergenerational joys and trauma of the Black American experience. The experience of the Black American man has caused rage that has disconnected him with the reality of his pain. This is a quote. Until we get back in touch with the reality of that pain, we won't understand that it's driven by internalized racism. Unless we address internalized racism, we'll continue to transmit this intergenerational trauma. We cannot fix structural racism until we fix internalized racism, and we cannot fix internalized racism until we fix structural racism. We must do both to be successful. So this is a great intervention. When I took a trauma-informed care class when I did my master's in public health at Boston University, we focused on creative trauma interventions such as hip hop, dance, sports, because movement and embodied healing does so much more. I was just talking with a friend the other day about how to discharge any triggers that may come up for us. And oftentimes we've been trained to run around in circles in our brain thinking about how we can try and diffuse the trigger. But what works a lot better is rocking or swaying or dancing or singing or drumming, something, or even just going for a walk. So this is wonderful. This is exactly the kind of thing that works well. And I'll be curious to see the outcomes. Okay, University of Calgary team develops global online hub for adverse childhood experiences research. And isn't UCalgary is also that's also the team that called out the ACEs Aware in California.
I think so, but
I think so too. Okay. So there was a paper that came out that with some valid critiques. So University of Calgary professors Dr. Sherry Madigan, PhD, and Dr. Tyler Williamson, PhD, developed ACEs Hub. And so you can go to our website, 10-collective.com, and click on blog to find this episode and all of the resources listed. So you can find a link to this hub after our event. To facilitate So ACEs Hub is a one-stop shop of all the research that currently exists on how adverse childhood experiences impact health. To facilitate data accessibility, the website features an intuitive interface that enables users to interact with the data, such as exploring results by author, institution, country, and year published. This is so needed.
Yes.
So we hope you all will utilize this amazing, amazing, amazing tool.
Yes, very exciting that they're right. Like, we love data. We love to be able to go and read the research and see what there is. And it's so great to be able to go and filter the data and
Yeah.
do all of those things. So really excited about that.
Yeah.
Okay, so our next one is local organization supports children through traumatic events with what they're calling connection kits. So this is a partnership with Kettering Police Department, which is in Ohio. And this initiative was started by the Lakes family after their children were sexually abused and exploited by a neighbor in 2023. And so the family, in partnership with, I think, a nonprofit or a grant that they received, creates what they call the connection kits. So one of the quotes says, "Our turtle is meant to tuck in into the shell if you feel unsafe. That's what turtles do." So the next kids will have a card for them that will explain to the kid, like, if you feel unsafe or scared, tuck in your shell because that's what turtles do. And so as a therapist, I know turtles with younger kids is a big image for thinking about like protection, and tucking in, and is something that often kids are drawn to with like play figures or puppets, to be able to like have that safe space when they need. And also the kits also include things like headphones, coloring books, and then some gift cards for like food and different kind of like travel expenses. So again, I wish we didn't need things called connection kits in our world. And I like that it's trying to give some kids some things to connect back with play. Just like, right, like that's what kids are supposed to be focused on, is playing, and also healing and just processing can come pretty naturally, like through the play that they're doing. So nice little community initiative that is started. Oh, and I didn't mention the, so if the police are responding to a call with children, then they will give the children the connection bag. So that's how they end up getting.
That's great. And this seems like a truly born out of the community. And so those are really nice interventions. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. The next one is called, it's like walking into a home. SOLA Center at Interact offers better alternative to traditional emergency room rape kit testing. So the SOLA Center works with local hospitals in North Carolina, including UNC Rex, Duke Raleigh, and Wake Med. So when often survivors go to the emergency room, they can ask to be sent to the SOLA Center instead. You can also call and make an appointment at the SOLA Center if you don't feel comfortable just going directly kind of to the hospital. All of the nurses at the center have received specialized training to provide the best care possible, and they make sure that there's a trauma advocate that is by the side of the survivor throughout the whole process. The nurses all are sexual assault nurse examiners. So they have specially trained they're trained in special forensics, and are able to provide a holistic approach, and really try to use trauma-informed care within their services. And the center has a complete exam room with all of the supplies and tools for evidence collection, including tools that not every hospital has. And I think when I read that line of like tools that not every hospital has, I was like, why doesn't every hospital have the things that they need to do this, which I know it seems like every week we have a story related to sexual abuse survivors and kind of like the process. So things are happening, hopefully going in a more kind of trauma-informed direction for that. But when I read sentences like that, I'm like, we still have so far to go in that area, and just that like places don't have the resources and the tools that they need. And this was just another example of thinking about trauma-informed design too. So the rooms not looking like institutionalized rooms, not looking like your typical emergency kind of room within a hospital, trying to make them so they feel a little safer and more comfortable for people who have just experienced trauma.
Yeah, great. Yeah, that's much better. That's the softer and safer world with care that we are seeking to create. So that's wonderful. Okay, benefits assessments can re-traumatize veterans. We spoke to more than 100 veterans to find out how the process could be improved. And so this is an article out of theconversation.com in the UK. After our work with military veterans, we would argue that reforms should be guided by the principles of trauma-informed practice. So this is a great example of using trauma-informed care principles to improve mental health and mental health outcomes, especially for those who actively participate in war and violence, which is the origins of PTSD research, are with this population. So they often need to complete multiple assessments. And for some veterans, the stress of the assessments and the reassessments of a worsening condition is detrimental to their health. Sometimes they can even be re-traumatized. So veterans have gone through horrific events. If they have to bring it up all the time, this can be re-traumatizing. This is particularly true when there is a lack of clarity around the purpose of the assessments. Repeat assessments and where those assessing them don't understand the veteran experience. So we do want to avoid re-traumatizing anyone, reassessing and reassessing over and over, and having people retell their story, especially with listeners who are not sensitive to the information they're taking in, can cause a lot of harm. So it looks like this is, the early stages. We've discovered that this is a problem. The next part will be, of course, someone stepping in to create a new public health intervention that fixes this problem using trauma-informed practices. So looking forward to seeing where that goes.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that we've talked about too is often people have to access different services, and the services sometimes use the same assessments or require the same questions to be asked, which is just requiring people to tell their story over and over and over again, instead of thinking about how do we create these connected systems that can share information so we aren't requiring people to fill out the same forms and tell their stories over and over again. So hoping we can move towards changes like that too.
Absolutely. Okay, so in adverse childhood experiences research, the relationship between childhood trauma and non-suicidal self-injury in high school students, the mediating role of the stress perception, and the moderating role of teacher-student relationship. So this is in the Journal of BMC Psychology, July 2024. All first-year high school students from 2 randomly selected schools in Yunnan Province, China, were included in the study. So there were a total of 1,329 valid questionnaires obtained. 38.6% were male and 61.4% were female. The participants' ages ranged from 16 to 20 years with a mean age of 16.5 years. The results of the study indicate that childhood trauma significantly and positively predicts non-suicidal self-injury in high school students, which is consistent with previous research. These findings suggest a potential mechanism whereby childhood trauma enhances high school students' sensitivity to stress, subsequently amplifying the impact of pre-existing stressful events and ultimately contributing to the emergence of non-suicidal self-injury. So this indicates that favorable teacher-student relationships may attenuate the impact of childhood trauma on stress perception, ultimately reducing the occurrence of non-suicidal self-injury. So this is a great example of positive childhood experiences in practice where there may be stress and trauma at home. However, there is the influence of a positive adult in the child's life, which is a positive childhood experience, providing some support that helps reduce self-inflicted violence. So this is a great study that confirms that research.
Yeah. Our next is patient-provider trust as a key component of prenatal screening for adverse childhood experiences, a concept analysis. And this is from the Journal of Midwifery Women's Health in June of 2024. Like the title says, this is a concept analysis, and it was conducted, and 32 articles met criteria for the study. The researchers defined trust in prenatal ACE screening as a network of evidence-based attributes that include the timing of the screening, patient familiarity with the healthcare provider, cultural competence, demystifying trauma, open dialogue between the patient and healthcare provider, and patient comfort and respect. So a lot of different concepts and pieces going into kind of that definition that they created. So what they found with the concept analysis was the importance of ACE screening, and then it also provided suggestions for establishing trust in the context of prenatal ACE screening. The results give insight and general guidance for healthcare providers looking to implement ACE screening in a trauma-informed way. So you can read the article for kind of more detailed information. I'll share kind of one or two examples of that. But one attribute of trust that both patients and healthcare providers identified as especially important was the timing of the ACE screening. So alongside administering the screener after multiple prenatal visits, researchers suggested that it may be helpful to set the stage for screening by explaining the ACE screening tool throughout the first few appointments so that the patient has sufficient time to consider it. And I liked their use of the word consider it, not so the patient may complete it, but they may consider if it is something that they may want to complete or not. So I just like that transparency of like what it is, having conversations, that there's consent, the patient has a choice if they're going to do it or not. So I liked many of those things that they talked about. And they also talked about the patients as well as the healthcare providers. Both reported that a trusting patient-provider relationship needs to happen before any discussion about childhood trauma. So that kind of relationship, that trust and that safety needs to be there before starting that conversation and before feeling in a place to be able to share experiences. The researchers did say that further research is needed to evaluate pregnant patients' attitudes toward ACE screening, as well as how a healthcare provider's trauma history might influence their care, and then to understand the racial, ethnic, and cultural barriers to ACE screening, which is something that we have talked about, and that is a big thing when we're thinking about the use of the ACE questionnaire and ACE screening in general. So while this one was saying there can be some good things that can happen from ACE screenings, I really liked that the focus was on slowing down and being really intentional throughout the whole design of the use of an ACE screening, and really making sure that it's aligning with trauma-informed principles. So a nice study if you want to read more. I really encourage you to read the whole study for that one.
Yeah, that's super interesting.
Yeah. The next one is, are differences evident in the ways boys and girls appraise and interpret their traumatic experiences? A qualitative analysis of youth trauma narratives. This was in the July 2024 Violence and Victims Journal. The purpose of the study was to explore potential similarities and differences in the ways boys and girls appraise and interpret their traumatic experiences, and to better understand how gender roles, performance, and socialization processes may impact trauma experiences, appraisals, and narratives within the context of trauma-focused treatment. So this was more focused on kind of clinical research. So researchers used thematic analysis to analyze the trauma narratives of 16 youth ages 8 to 16 who had experienced multiple types of child maltreatment and who were receiving trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy to address clinically elevated post-traumatic stress symptoms. There were 4 themes that emerged. There were variations in the content of negative cognitions. There were differences in relational emotion, There's adoption of socially prescribed gender roles and symptom differences. This one article, I tried looking so many different ways to be able to access it, but it was just behind a paywall in every place that I looked. So we will link to it. So if you happen to have access, you can read the whole thing. But unfortunately, I couldn't get more information behind these 4 themes. And I really want to, because it was interesting to me to think about. So I'm going to keep this article flagged and try to get some more information. If I do, I'll make sure to kind of bring it back and share it here as well. They did note that there were many similarities that existed in the youth trauma narratives, but differences emerged that point to the importance of social context and the ways gender role expectations and socialization processes influence youth's appraisal of and response to traumatic events. Also, the findings indicated the importance of considering distress tolerance, relational emotion, gender identity development, and role socialization within the treatment milieu. And so, without having all of the details there, this one to me was, again, saying like the importance of that individualized treatment. Who is this person? Where are they at? Not just taking kind of a check the box or like manualized approach to the person that we are working with. And this is, I think, the second one that we've talked about in the last few weeks, where they looked at the difference between boys and girls. So, right, just using the gender binary. So not the perfect study with that, but where there are some differences that are being noticed and important to consider and think about when we're thinking about treatment, especially.
Great. There is a little bit of background noise, I think, from your end coming in and out. So as we move forward, I don't know if that's something that you can mitigate at all. Are you hearing it?
It might be my dryer is running upstairs. So it could be that the dryer noise is coming through. So I will just pause and step away for a moment while you do the next. I'll turn that off and hopefully that will help.
Perfect. Okay, that is exactly what it sounds like. Okay.
Perfect.
Okay, so childhood trauma begets substance abuse among adolescents. So this is the Journal of Child Abuse and Neglect, August 2024. So new research study led by the University of Cape Town's Department of Psychology. So adolescents who have experienced childhood trauma, such as physical, sexual, or psychological abuse, have resorted to misusing substances to cope with the aftermath. They are more likely to develop problematic substance use behaviors later in life. So adolescents at several schools in Cape Town, approximately 690 learners between the ages of 13 and 18 participated in the study. So an adolescent history of childhood maltreatment significantly increases the severity of their substance-related challenges. In addition, respondents indicated that they used substances as a coping mechanism to help them deal with past traumatic incidents. The research study found that peer pressure also increased the risk of problematic alcohol use among respondents. So this sounds like a study that confirms a lot of the research literature. So always important to understand the links between childhood trauma and substance misuse. Haven't seen too many trauma-informed care interventions for substance users in the United States. I'm not familiar with the treatment options in South Africa, but it's always good to get data that, yes, this connection is there, and therefore treatment needs to be trauma-informed. So we have in the West, a pretty punitive culture when it comes to substance use. You know, in the United States, we had the war on drugs. And so we tend to have treatment that really punishes individuals for not trying hard enough. So we do continue to need studies like this that says, no, substance misuse is related to childhood maltreatment. Therefore, the treatment for substance use disorder needs to look a lot different.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to add, Allison, like, I think like it's a coping skill. It's a way to like cope with the intense feelings and the like experience. And sometimes there can be this like assumption or feeling from people of like, well, just stop doing it. But like, what does that mean to stop doing it? And if you don't have a different coping skill to replace that coping skill, then like that doesn't feel good if you're that person. That's a lot of intense feelings and emotions or just dissociating that can happen. So that trauma informed like approach and knowledge, I think is really important when we're thinking about that, because it can go really punitive or just not be looked at in an empathetic way, in a very like judgmental way.
Yeah, absolutely. And so part of our mission at 10 Collective is to help everyone possible, as many of you that bring us in to help you understand the science of trauma and stress. And so what happens with substance use disorder is that individuals who have a high ACEs score or high intensity of childhood trauma, they get triggered a lot more often and with a greater severity. And when that happens, they want to self-soothe. And substances provide immediate soothing in the brain for intense memories, emotions, and sensations in the body. So even though we know it and you listening may know it, people who work at correctional facilities or rehab centers or the people who make these policies still don't know the brain science of trauma and addiction. So please consider bringing us in. We can do really wonderful trainings with your group on how this works to make sure that the people most affected by childhood trauma, who are substance users, they tend to be the most impacted, don't continue to be re-traumatized in systems that don't understand what addiction is and how it works. Okay, adverse childhood experiences are tied to long-term psychotic disorder outcomes. The Association of Adverse Childhood Experiences with Long-Term Outcomes of Psychosis, a 21-year prospective cohort study after a first episode of psychosis. So this is in the Journal of Psychological Medicine, May 2024. Investigators conducted a prospective cohort study to explore the long-term predictive ability of ACEs in forecasting outcomes of psychotic disorders, controlling for confounders of obstetric complications, family risk for schizophrenia, and socioeconomic status. 243 participants were in this study. The investigators observed that 55% of individuals with psychosis had a documented history of ACEs at mild or higher levels, and ACEs were more prevalent and severe in schizophrenia relative to any other psychotic disorders. Further, the investigators noted a dose-response relationship between the levels of ACEs and the severity of outcome domains, in which individuals with high levels of exposure to ACEs had worse long-term outcomes, particularly for positive and negative symptoms, all role functioning variables, immediate verbal learning, and processing speed. So this is something that for those of us who work in the field, we understand that childhood trauma leads to dissociative disorders, including schizophrenia. But in terms of the mainstream understanding this, what we see in the mainstream typically is a lot of news still saying, well, it's genetic, such things like this. And while epigenetics may play a factor, what keeps coming up in studies over and over again is that it is childhood trauma that results in severe mental illness. So if you think about this from a more intuitive perspective, and I have experienced a family member with schizophrenia, so I saw it firsthand. Why did this person need to develop an adaptation, a self-soothing or coping strategy that involved going into their head and inventing another reality? And once you ask that question, the answer is obvious. And so we haven't been asking the right questions. When it comes to severe mental illness, again, just like substance use, this was once a coping strategy to deal with high levels of stress, abuse, neglect. And when it comes to schizophrenia, there is a high correlation with something called betrayal trauma. And that is where the person who is supposed to be taking care of you is also your abuser.
Yeah. The next one is child maltreatment during the COVID-19 pandemic, implications for child and adolescent mental health. This is in Frontiers in Child, Adolescence, and Psychiatry, July 2024. So this is really just a narrative, taking a look at all of the different studies that came out, all of the different research. I'll kind of break down the different parts. So it's really, the goal of it was to provide a comprehensive understanding of how the many changes and challenges associated with the pandemic influence worldwide occurrences of child maltreatment and subsequently the mental health of children and adolescents. So it starts off by presenting well-established evidence regarding the impact of child maltreatment on the mental health of children and adolescents, both before and during the COVID pandemic. And examines the existing literature on the prevalence of child maltreatment during the pandemic. It offers some explanations for conflicting findings. So some findings found that maltreatment went up. Some findings found that maltreatment went down. So it offers some explanations for why that could be, and as well as key mechanisms influencing the prevalence of maltreatment. It also discusses risk and protective factors for maltreatment, as well as mechanisms by which maltreatment operates to influence child and adolescent mental health. And then based on all of that kind of evidence from the studies, they provide important recommendations for advancing research on child maltreatment, emphasizing the necessity for routine monitoring of maltreatment exposure at a population level and discussing the implications for the field of child protection. And really, when I kind of went through and read this, what was standing out for me is just like the systemic change that needs to happen to help to reduce parental stress, to help to reduce poverty. So whether we're thinking about during the height of the pandemic or not, if you are incredibly stressed as a parent, if you're working on other things, if that stress in your own childhood trauma has led to mental health issues for you, then it can be really hard to parent in the way that you want to parent. And if parents have the support, if they have financial resources and they don't have to worry about all of those things, they can focus on things like being connected to their children. And all of those different things. And I think the pandemic added all of these other layers of stress onto families. There was lots of job loss, all of those things. There was the child tax credit that offered that helped to alleviate some of that stress for parents. But for some families, that was not enough of kind of financial support. So if that number was higher or done in a different way, I wonder what that could have meant for cases of maltreatment. I think there were lots of opportunities to really do some great and different things. There's a little bit of movement and then it was unfortunately rolled back.
Right.
But hopefully in the future we can move in the direction of supporting communities and families and human beings and caring for each other.
Hopefully we can figure it out.
We can, because the other direction is not feeling great.
Right.
Okay. The next is Mothers with a History of Trauma and Their Children, a Systemic Review of Treatment Interventions. This was in Frontiers in Psychology, July 2024. This was another review that was really trying to examine the effects of trauma-informed interventions on improving the mother-child relationship among mothers with a history of trauma and their young children under 6 years old. It analyzed 15 articles that met the eligibility criteria, which encompassed a sample size of 1,321 mothers. The study found that while some interventions demonstrated small to large effects, the quality of evidence was really only moderate. So again, not having a lot of evidence around these kind of like widely used interventions. The most promising interventions were parent-child interaction therapy or PCIT, child-parent psychotherapy or CPP, and maternal empowerment program MEP, which all included elements of psychotherapy, psychoeducation, and skills training. So the study really helped kind of underscore the importance of understanding the needs of mother-child dyads affected by trauma, and again, tailoring interventions to meet those needs. So those needs of that specific dyad. Overall, the literature suggests that interventions combining psychotherapeutic, psychoeducational, and skills training components were most effective in improving mother and child-related outcomes for mothers with a history of trauma and their young children. So yeah, glad that they're doing this study, and I hope we continue to study these different treatments that are offered and think about what that means for different dyads. This one was specifically looking at mothers. Makes me curious about fathers who are like primary caregivers, other family members who may be the primary caregiver. Do these treatment models like work? Does it look different? So it just made me think of all kinds of other studies that would be important to do, I think.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that is one thing that I've heard lots of complaints about, for example, like in The Body Keeps the Score, because he continually uses the word mother when, he means caregiver or parent. Caregiver is better, but because all sorts of people take care of children. But we still live in a reality in which in many places all over the world, it is the mother that is the primary caregiver. So it's often what we end up using and studying. So,
yep.
So trajectories of housing insecurity from infancy to adolescence and adolescent health outcomes. So this is in the Journal of Pediatrics, July 2024, data from the Future Families and Child Wellbeing Study. Trajectories of insecurity. There were 3 different trajectories of housing insecurity in the study, labeled as secure, moderately insecure, and highly insecure. Of the 4,714 children included in the analysis, 47.3% were classified as secure, 46.4% classified as moderately insecure, and 6.3% as highly insecure. So the secure group had the highest proportion of people who were married, higher educational attainment, and a larger household income. Conversely, the highly insecure group had the lowest educational attainment and more people living below the poverty line. So experience with housing insecurity indicators, half of those children in the highly insecure group experienced 2 or more of the above indicators until age 5. Interestingly, the number of indicators experienced seemed to peak early and decrease drastically in adolescence. So the adolescents in the highly insecure group compared to their peers in the secure group exhibited significantly more depressive and anxiety symptoms. They were also less likely to describe their self-reported overall health as very good or excellent. The authors demonstrated several interesting findings, one being that children who experience housing insecurity early in their life are at increased risk for poorer outcomes in adolescence. This article challenges us to move beyond screening. In our practices, we have the ability to affect policy, advocate for changes, and approach community organizations with cultural humility. So we know that the earlier the trauma, the more impact it has on a person's life. And this is because the brain is developing rapidly in the early years. So this seems to confirm that children who had early traumas like housing insecurity had much poorer outcomes in adolescence. Yeah. And it seems to confirm, you always kind of read, like, especially when it comes to like secure attachment, which can lead to having higher education and like they said, being married and larger income. They typically always say it's about half and half. So it's interesting to see that this supports that finding as well in terms of secure and insecure. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's always interesting to see, why is it half and half? Mm-hmm. I have questions. Why is it like that? Yeah.
I also liked the very last part that you shared where mm-hmm. it talked about it challenges us to move beyond screening, because mm-hmm. I think there's such this thing of like, let's just do screening, like screening is doing something. but screening is like reactive
Right.
to it. And it's saying like this article is specifically like addressing like pediatricians and those in the healthcare field of like, we have the ability to change policy, to advocate for a change. And like those are the things that need to happen. We need these systemic changes.
Mhm.
So children are less likely to experience trauma, are less likely to be unhoused, less likely to live in poverty.
Yeah.
And so those are the things that when we're going through the news, when I see things that are trying to do that, that gets me really excited of what are those big changes that people are trying to do instead of continuing to kind of try to like just put Band-Aids on this huge public health crisis that we have.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Agree. Well, that is what we have for today. Nothing on psychological safety this week, but hopefully we will see you on Tuesday to talk about psychological safety in the workplace. So we will see you Tuesday, and we will see you also next Thursday for another Healing Horizons.